I told you that we live in a country where there exists a two-tiered system of criminal justice, would you believe that this nation of ours treats those without money different than those with the capital resources to argue their case to the courts? Did you know that in this great nation called America, that fines, fees disproportionately burden poor people with financial sanctions and actually send them to jail if they don't pay the sanctions, which, by the way, have nothing to do with criminal justice as much as it has to do with fueling state budgets? The fact is that many state policies in our system of criminal justice has and continues to drive mass incarceration. Policies I'm referring to involve the assessment of excessive fines and fees which are borne by poor people in the criminal justice system and has the result of spawning arrest, court proceedings, incarceration, and other counterproductive outcomes for those who lack the ability to pay. Furthermore, criminal justice debt also contributes to the destabilization of families who have this type of financial burden. The unfortunate truth is that people living at the economic margins see their loved ones who are formerly incarcerated have their road to reentry blocked simply because of unpaid what's called legal financial obligations, or LFOs. Yes, the cycle of poverty and imprisonment is fueled by political and legislative decisions which do not advance the scales of justice, but do contribute unnecessarily to increases in taxpayers, and those taxpayers have no idea they're supporting policies in the criminal justice system which are, according to the Supreme Court, in violation of human rights. Hi, my name is Ron Cooey, and I'll be your host for this show called Prison Debt Solutions. Now, the show is designed to contribute towards the national conversation on criminal justice reform. We believe the show will generate legal and policy discussions which should serve advocates, policymakers, and those throughout the country who care, and very diverse stakeholders in criminal justice to help chart concrete reforms. Prison Debt Solutions will not only discuss the issues around the criminalization of prison debt, but we'll have our guests on the show who are experiencing the struggle of trying to pay such debts in order to avoid sanctions up to and including jail time. Subsequent to it appearing on the show, ex-felons and their families will be connected with both legal support and financial counseling. The results of their saga shall be aired at a later date, and we'll share with you, the viewing audience, the outcomes of having the requisite resources available to ensure the effective application of case law to prevent incarceration resulting from non-payment of this immoral and illegal assessment of debt. Now, I should note that the criminalization of debt is not a new phenomenon in the United States. In fact, such policies go all the way back to colonial America, where numerous jurisdictions established debtors' prisons using the same models used in Great Britain, and they were prevalent throughout the United States. I think up until the 1800s, you saw a lot of them. Now, the United States extensively eliminated the imprisonment of debtors under federal law in 1833, leaving the practice up to the states. I would submit that the government had it right back in 1833 when debtors' prison was outlawed. However, by leaving the practice up to the states, things have digressed over the last 186 years to the point where the human and financial cost has become unacceptable. Now, take a look at some data on the issue of prison debt, and we'll explore how we got to where we are. Now, the need to plug holes in state budgets has motivated growth in what is termed legal financial obligations. Consider these two facts. Between 1990 and 2014, incarceration rates increased by 61%, and in 2014, over 2.2 million people were incarcerated in local jails or in state and federal prisons. As you can imagine, the price of poker, as they say, has gone up as well. Correctional budgets have risen so high that in 2013, almost a dozen states spent more on corrections than higher education. As enforcement has increased, budget pressure mounted equally to the point where policymakers began arguing the taxpayers should not bear responsibility for these increasing costs, but rather the individuals convicted of crime should do so. So what happened? Municipalities and state governments turned to monetary sanctions as a source of additional revenue. Let's get a handle on the terms used in our criminal justice system so we understand these points. So now look at fees, fines. Now they're intended to support operational costs in the criminal justice system and may also be used to compensate victims for losses. You've got miscellaneous charges. Now, what are those? Those are amounts assessed that ultimately compensate individuals for non-court entities or services relating to the process and litigation, and it varies from case to case. How about surcharges? Those are amounts added to fines and fees or court costs that are used for designated purposes or are deposited in the general fund. And speaking of court costs, they're assessed against a party or parties in litigation. Then, of course, there's restitution, which refers to financial obligations intended to compensate victims of a crime for their actual losses. Now, generally speaking, restitution supposedly consists of money transmitted to the individual victims of the crime. In the real world, it is oftentimes paid to government-run victims' funds or to reimburse government agencies and even insurance companies. Now, most people know bail is a bond payment for defendants released from jail prior to court proceedings. So it's apparent that in the United States system of criminal justice, things have digressed to the old debtor's prison model, which I referred to at the beginning of my remarks. Now let's take a listen to Blake Strode, a civil rights lawyer who currently serves as Executive Director of Arch City Defenders out of St. Louis, as he explains the policy of modern-day debtors' prisons in the context of a case he argued in St. Louis, Missouri.
Debtor's prison essentially refers to the idea of being jailed because of your inability to pay some debt. In this case, people are being jailed because they can't afford to pay traffic fines and to post cash bonds that are being set sometimes by the courts and sometimes by jail guards and other officials. Municipalities have a right to enforce the laws on their books. What they don't have a right to do is treat one group of people differently than they do another. And now, poor people in St. Louis County are being treated very, very differently than people who have money.
Now here's the highlights, or shall I say lowlights, of criminal justice legal financial obligations. Offenders in the U.S. more than $50 billion in criminal justice debt. Child support has the highest debt collection priority in the state and federal jurisdictions. About 70% of males between 33 and 40 are fathers upon being incarcerated. The sanctions imposed upon those unable to pay have no benefit for the children. In fact, the sanctions have adverse consequences for those who can't afford to pay, such as garnishing wages, withholding of tax returns and Social Security benefits, suspension of driver's license, denial of passports, and encumbrance of bank accounts. These types of outcomes can and do strain the parent-child relationship by forcing many indigent parents to flee. LFOs that many offenders cannot afford to pay are counterproductive to their reintegration. They put an individual in a place to make a choice between LFOs and those essential life expenses such as food, rent, child support. See what happens when no one wins. Let's not talk about the inefficiency about such a system. Non-payment is very high due to the inability to pay. Therefore, in the system that initiates debt collection, those practices are usually more costly than the money they generate. Then those additional debt collection fees are placed upon offenders, thereby put them in even further in debt. In the real world, the consequences of such unmanageable financial burdens is that they increase the likelihood of recidivism when they are unable to pay. Now, we've discussed the hard dollars. Let's take a look at the collateral damage or hidden cost of prison debt. Probation and parole officers, when they monitor payment, this can result in overtime costs and less time devoted to offender risk and entry. When a debtor has to attend regular meetings with judges and clerks for collection proceedings, there's a chance that such activities also call for overtime and burden court dockets. Incarceration due to failure to pay. Clearly, this causes an increase in legal system staff in addition to incarceration costs. And debt being preferred to private collection agencies, here the debtor faces collection fees and damage to their credit. Suspend someone's driver's license, this creates obstacles to them finding and maintaining work. Wage garnishment and tax rebate interception, well, there goes the game of being paid under the table. When debt's converted to a civil judgment, again, that's damage to a debtor's credit. And now the overwhelming majority of states and civil court judges can issue arrests for warrants for debtors. So here we are in an era where the bad policies of mass incarceration have to be paid for. Those who can least afford it are being asked to pay for it. Yes, the U.S. cost for policing, jails, prisons, and courts has risen by huge multiples since the 80s. Yes, it has come down to the pay-to-stay atmosphere of prison debt, forces an inmate to cough up money for basic services such as food, internet, medical care, and it goes on and on. All this despite the United States Constitution, 8th Amendment, which states, and I quote, "Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fees imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted," end quote. Under careful review, there's a likelihood of a mountain of examples which translate into excessive bail or fines.
People can be incarcerated for not paying their fines and fees. And if they're not paying that bill, the collections department can issue a warrant for that person's arrest. So that person will get arrested, not for committing a new crime, not for missing court, but simply for not paying money.
I probably paid it the first and the second month because I know if I don't pay it, I'm going to be incarcerated. That's what I don't understand.
Sometimes I miss court dates because I don't have money to catch the bus to get to court, or I don't have money to pay.
The system impacts more than just the individual, it also impacts their families.
So just picture me incarcerated and my mom have to do this by herself, feed my 4 kids and try to make money or think of some way to get money.
So the charges were dropping throughout the court. Even though my brother has been relieved of all those charges, the burden falls on me still to, do I pay the bonding agency or do I pay my rent?
What's happening is that the users of this system are now being required to pay for it. It's the poor people of New Orleans who are being charged all of this money. It's re-imprisoning people.
The costs just pile up, pile up, pile up, pile up.
It was really a battle because when I got released, it was like I still was in prison because I got this over my head now, not counting my kids, my bills, food, clothing, because I done lost a job, everything is gone. So when I come back out, I'm starting over.
What do we do now? We begin to generously circulate the excellent work being done to research this issue in light of constitutional law, judicial prudence, fairness, and human rights. Doing so will raise the profile of what the courts in the state of Washington have done to make concrete changes. They publicly announced on March 6, 2018, legislation under a bill that provides that poor people cannot be sanctioned for their inability to pay restitution and fines, plus it takes an important step towards ensuring that the poor aren't burdened for years or even jailed because they're unable to pay court-imposed LFOs.
I went to Washington's Correctional Center for Women in Gig Harbor, Washington, where I spent close to 3 years. On top of the prison sentence, I also received over $7,000 in legal financial obligations. Period of time. So that's why I called Northwest Justice Project, who directed me to Columbia Legal Services. And I was contacted by a gentleman by the name of Nick Allen.
Good morning, my name is Nick Allen, and I'm an attorney with Columbia Legal Services. For the past several years, CLS and the ACLU of Washington have worked on addressing barriers to successful reentry from jail and prison that are caused by legal financial obligations, which are more commonly known as LFOs.
Legal financial obligations, pretty straightforward. It's the fees, fines, costs, and restitution that are imposed by a court as part of a criminal judgment and sentence. So if you get a conviction in Washington State, you get legal financial obligations as part of your sentence.
Failure to pay LFOs often results in incarceration of indigent defendants. While the U.S. Supreme Court has outlawed debtors' prisons, every day in Washington State, people are incarcerated simply because they are too poor to pay their LFOs.
Well, in the midst of moving from place to place and really trying to utilize every penny that I had just to survive, I didn't have the money to make the payments.
It's really important to the way that our clients live their lives. For instance, with LFOs, if people have this debt that's hanging over their head for years and years, sometimes decades or the rest of their lives, they're never going to be able to go back to living a life in which they're free.
Just in those things, the money was gone.
Failure to pay LFOs is a common occurrence, and I think That's one of the reasons that we have the clinic in place and why we're doing the work around LFOs, is because, in theory, having legal financial obligations might make some sense because it assumes that you're going to have a wide range of people who are coming to the system and will be able to pay them. But in practice, the majority of people coming through our system are indigent, don't have the means to pay.
The first time I was arrested was completely homeless. I was asleep in a park in the middle of winter and was woke up by the police. And they informed me that I was not allowed to be sleeping in that particular area. And they ran my name and informed me that I had a warrant out of Benton County.
What we found in particular is a stark example in Benton County, Washington, where approximately 20% of people in custody on any given day are there because they did not pay fines and fees.
And I wasn't aware at the time that Benton County would arrest me for inability to make my payment.
In our observation, Benton County courts did not engage in the constitutionally required inquiry into people's ability to pay.
And, I was doing the absolute very best that I could. I would send, partial payments, or if I had missed a month, I would send double the next time, or, anything I could possibly do to try and keep up.
Benton County is one of the counties in the state that we've heard and have investigated in terms of their LFO collection and enforcement process, and she fit right in. The Reentry Clinic provides legal assistance to low-income people throughout the state who are facing barriers to successful reintegration back into the community following their release from prison or jail. And those barriers can either be caused by legal financial obligations or a criminal conviction that prevents them from accessing housing and or employment. The clinic is staffed by institutions project staff, as well as volunteer attorneys throughout the community who've taken an interest in this issue and have wanted to volunteer.
The Institutions Project has been part of CLS for over 30 years. We focus on helping people who are institutionalized in the state of Washington. So a lot of our clients, most of our clients are in prisons or jails, but we also help people who are in mental health facilities, immigration detention, juvenile detention facilities. And our goal is to work on the reasons that people are institutionalized in the first place, the conditions that they face while they're institutionalized, and helping avoid reinstitutionalization once people are released.
Valerie's got a great story, and we wanted to make sure that we stayed in contact with her, not only because of the county that she's from, but just because she really serves as a great example of somebody who has successfully re-entered back into the community. And if she could just address these legal financial obligations, she'd be on even a better path to that re-entry and could focus on her children and her education and her future employment prospects instead of having to worry about her past and the debt that's been imposed upon her.
I've been accepted into a program called Post-Prison Education. I am a full-time 4.0 student at Highline Community College. I am working on eventually my master's, but right now my associate's in social work.
For me, it has a lot to do with freedom and liberty and being able to kind of pay your debt to society, move on. And it's the same with addressing, employment and housing. You've done your sentence and you still have to pay the price. It's like the shackles never come off.
My ultimate goal is to get my master's with social work with an emphasis on child development, and to open a supervised visitation facility for low-income parents who need visitations with their children.
What these lawmakers came to grips with is that only 23% of LFOs were being paid statewide, and 20% of people in custody on any given day were serving time for non-payment of court-imposed debt. This legislative action can be characterized by the following major changes. prioritization of victim restitution instead of paying in the operating costs for criminal justice, ending the practice of jailing people who are unable to pay LFOs, defining clearer standards for indigence and ability to pay, reducing the number of mandatory LFOs based on findings of defendant indigence, elimination of interest on LFOs, setting up manageable payment plans for the indigent, and community service creation to replace LFOs, and protecting public assistance being received by defendants so that their benefits are not automatically deducted. The Governor of Washington, Governor Jay Inslee, said of this legislation, and I quote, "This law ensures a person's ability to pay is considered when LFOs are imposed and enables people with limited resources who have served their time to move on with their lives. No one should serve jail time simply because they are too poor to pay." End quote. Now, this is a model that's consistent with the U.S. Constitution and what other states can and should follow. The state of Washington has diverse and notable and distinguished company on this issue. Here are just a few. The Criminal Justice Program at Harvard Law School, the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University, the U.S. Department of Justice, the American Civil Liberties Union, and John Jay College of Criminal Justice at City University in New York. Now, Prison Debt Solutions will advocate the following policies as offered by these and other institutions. 1, lawmakers should evaluate the total debt burden of existing fees before adding new fees or increasing fee amounts. 2, indigent defendants should be exempt from user fees and payment plans, and other debt collection efforts should be tailored to an individual's ability to pay. State streets should immediately cease incarcerating and jailing individuals for failure to pay criminal justice debt, particularly before a court has made an ability to pay determination. 4, public defender fees should be eliminated to reduce pressures that can lead to the conviction of innocent, over-incarcerated. On to 6. Number 6 talks about being able to have the policymakers evaluate the cost of popular debt collection methods such as arrest, incarceration, and driver's license suspensions, including the salary and time spent by employees involved in the collection and the effect of these methods on reentry and recidivism. 7, agencies involved in debt collection should extend probation terms or suspend driver's license only in those cases where an individual can't afford to pay the criminal justice debt but refuses to do so. Number 8, legislatures should eliminate poll taxes that deny individuals the right to vote when they are unable to pay criminal justice debt. And 9, courts should offer community service programs that build job skills for individuals unable to afford criminal justice debt. And finally, number 10, the state courts should be required by law to collect data related to criminal justice debt and to publish a cohesive report.
We saw that this legal debt was very substantial relative to their expected earnings. So it gave us, again, a picture, but the interviews gave us insight into sort of how the process occurs of receiving legal financial obligations and then the consequences in their lives. So it really showed us that this is a substantial amount of debt for individuals, and if they tried to or attempted to make payments, that it hurt, their budgets, their family budgets in other ways. Spending money on medications or school clothes or presents for children, things like that. And if they weren't able to or chose not to pay it because they felt overwhelmed with the debt or didn't feel that they should have to pay it, they found that there was a lot of legal recourse for that action. And so that this debt really kept them coupled with the criminal justice system, that they couldn't get away from court supervision. And so had we not done those interviews, we would have had no idea that this practice was happening. And sort of the threat of warrants, rearrests, and then reincarceration for non-payment was definitely sort of... I think, other than sort of the descriptive and sort of knowing the amounts and knowing that this is a sort of a nationwide phenomenon that's increasing, knowing that this really keeps people sort of tethered to the criminal justice system, that this is a process that they can't, many who are poor cannot get out from under, and it keeps them constantly on the radar. And so they can be pulled over. Many feel that they can be pulled over any time for non-payment, and that this is a constant worry that some of them had. And I've talked with, several people I've done interviews with that they've said, I've been stopped on the street, I've been clean, right? I haven't been doing anything illegal, but because I haven't been making regular payments. One man I interviewed in Spokane, he hadn't been making regular payments for 3 months and got arrested and was incarcerated for 2 weeks, strictly for non-payment. So just sort of knowing that, and that, further research needs to be done, but this might be part of the puzzle of why we see this explosion in incarceration and why we've seen this explosion in probation violations, right? And people being reincarcerated for not abiding by their court order. It might be a part of that piece of the puzzle that I want to further I think ideologically, a question can be posed about what are our aims as a state for offenders. And if a priority is reintegration and rehabilitation, then it is assessing them these large amounts of legal debt really effective for these individuals to be productive citizens, right? Is it efficient, right? How much are we spending to recoup this amount of money from the individuals? And also, is it realistic?
It is our hope that you, the viewing audience, will become familiar with the history and pathology of what has morphed into modern-day debtors' prisons in the U.S. criminal justice system. Our show will produce a progressive exchange between myself, the host, ex-felons, their families, as well as in-studio guests as they discuss this issue. The pathways and adverse societal consequences of criminal justice debt should be fully explored through real-world experiences accompanied by solutions to criminal justice debt. Through discussion and debate, audiences will gain an understanding of the cost to taxpayers for the criminalization of convicted felons' debt. And subsequent to it appearing on the show, ex-felons and their families will be directed to both legal support and financial counseling. The results of their saga shall be aired at a later date to share with the viewing audience the outcomes of having resources to fight for effective application of the law to prevent the imposition of immoral and illegal assessment of debt. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Prison Debt Solutions. I need your attention on an important workshop called Prison Debt Solutions. If you, a loved one, or someone you just know and care about is facing debt that they can't pay to the criminal justice system, you need to attend the Prison Debt Solutions workshop. You'll receive legal solutions to put a halt to the criminalization of debt in your life or the life of loved ones. This workshop will deliver on how to drastically reduce fines, fees, restitution, and court costs that keep you from moving forward after having run-ins with the criminal justice system. Now consider these facts. Many courts routinely impose fines, fees, restitution, and court costs without even considering whether a person is able to pay them, and that is contrary to state law. This criminal justice debt can amount to a lifetime sentence. Secondly, people who are unable to pay can end up behind bars as a result of procedures that violate their rights. And the threat of incarceration forces poor people to choose between meeting their most basic needs and paying for these legal financial obligations, or as they're known, LFOs. The Prison Debt Solutions Workshop will help you learn the secrets, the ins and outs of criminal justice debt. Prison Debt Solutions Workshop will provide you with the legal statutes, how to fill out the necessary forms, how to file them, when and where to file them in court, and who to talk to and what to say when you talk to them. And when you leave Prison Debt Solutions Workshop, you'll know how to represent yourself in court, understand diversionary programs, and how to get costs waived after sentencing. You'll receive this and more. Now go to our website, prisondebt.com, for the time, date, and location. That's prisondebt.com. You don't want to miss this opportunity to take control of your freedom.